Good morning everyone, True here with another African Violet video. This morning I want to have a little bit of a rant. I just got a message from someone who's watched my videos and they've come back and they've said that when you plant your African violets you should be using 50-50 peat moss and coarse perlite. My soil looks too dense. If I were you, I would repot into smaller pots and I'd use wick watering method. And I got to tell you, things like this drive me nuts. And it's not someone giving advice and all that. That's fine. I love it when people make suggestions and say, you should try this. I think it'll work. But it's when people make blanket statements and say, this is how you grow an African violet. These are the methods you should use. And if you use anything else, basically, you're wrong and your plants will die. Drives me nuts. Blanket statements drives me absolutely nuts, because you can't do blanket statements with African violets. You can't. If anything comes from me doing this channel, anything at all, I need people to know that African violets are climate specific, and what works for one person won't work for somebody else. It just won't. Well, take that back. It may. But you have to do your own experiments. You have to get your plant. I'm sorry, that's my birds going off behind me. They're having a rant too. They're climate specific. And the person who sent the message is in England. They're in England. And the climate in England is completely different to the climate in Australia and in Brisbane, Australia. So I love it when people, they want to try and help and they want to give suggestions, which is what I think everyone is trying to do when they're making these suggestions of African violets. But I really want everyone to know that if you tell someone that that's the way you grow it and it's the only way you can grow it, and if you grow it any other way, you'll kill your plants, you're setting them up for failure. Because African violets, they don't have the textbook on growing. They haven't read the book. They grow. It's where you have your plant in your house. You might have it on an east-facing window, and it'll grow differently to someone who has their plant on a north-facing window. You can't say this will work for you, and that's the only way you can do it. You just can't. So, if anything comes from these videos, I just want people to understand that with African violets, you have to do some experimenting in your own location. Listen to the advice people give you. Listen to it, and then go away and do your experiments. And that comes from any advice I've given you too. Because some advice that I will have said works fantastic for me, and I've hoped that I've really tried to put it out there to say to people, if this works for me, that's great, but you need to test it for where you are, because it may not work for you. It just might not. So please, like, I love it if you send comments and you put your comments. That is wonderful. I love that. But if you do, just be really careful about making sure you say that that's what works for your area, and for the person that you're giving the advice to just test it and experiment for their area, because it may not work for them, And the advice of people saying all the time, put it in a smaller pot, that'll fix your problem. Not necessarily. And sometimes, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but sometimes the size of the pot really doesn't matter with African violets. I've got African violets growing in large terracotta pots. Large. So it's the size of the pot, yes, will help it flower, because once the roots hit the side of the pots and they get root bound, it will often spark them to flower, but not always, because if they're not getting all the other things they need, they may not flower. So the size of the pot can affect it, but not always. So everyone out there, with African violets. Please, 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 please. If you're giving people advice, say to them, this works for me. This is what I'm doing. You can try this. Do some experimenting. And hopefully that will work for you too. So I'm just showing you here. I'm calming down now. I'm showing you here just some of my babies that all need repotting, most of them. They're getting very old, very grown up. But they're still in their small little pots, and they're quite happy there. You can see some of the ones here that they've got slightly different color leaves on this side of the greenhouse, because I've got my African violets outside at the moment. That works for me because of my climate. May not work for you. But the ones growing on the right hand side of the little greenhouse, see how the leaves are a pinker, darker color? They've got that pinker, and this is the lowest shelf, which means that it's sort of closer to the concrete underneath it, which means that the temperature is cooler, which will change the color of the leaves. And also one side gets more light than the other side. So you can see how it affects the colors of the leaves and the plants. So see, there you go. In the same greenhouse, these plants on this side are growing differently to the ones on this side. And that is only because of the amount of light and the temperature underneath. The temperature is affecting it as well. So there are so many factors, so many factors as to how African violets grow. So you cannot make blanket statements to say, you know, you're doing the wrong thing. This is what you should be doing. Because you can't. And anyone who ever says that to you, don't take any information from them, because I guarantee you, they don't know what they're talking about. Because if they grow African violets, they will know that what works for one person won't necessarily work for you. So, rant over. I apologize. But I love these plants. I love them so much. And it breaks my heart when I see one that's dying, because when it doesn't need to be. When it doesn't need to be. So sorry, I'm very passionate. I'm very passionate about my African violets. But rant over. And yeah, and always, you know, when someone gives you some advice, listen to it. And even if I'm giving you some advice, listen, but don't necessarily take it. Go away, do your experiments. Do your experiments. And then build on every little bit of information that you get, and then find out what works best for you. And rant over. And my birds have calmed down now too, so so thank you for watching.